Can you hear those winds? It's howling out here just off the shores of the Hudson Bay. In fact, it's behind me where the ice is just starting to form. Polar bears are nearby, they're in the area. That's because today we're outside of Churchill, Manitoba. We're bringing you the Tundra Connections program live from Buggy One. My name's Kyle Schutt. I'm the partner on Polar Bears International's Tundra Connections program, and I'm coming to you from Discovery Education. Now let's take a little tour of Buggy One, why don't we? I mentioned this is kind of like a monster truck, right? Big wheels, big tires, they keep us safe from the bears, but there's a whole lot more going on. In fact, I'd like to introduce you to my friend here, KT, because KT has a really important job behind the scenes. As we go throughout the program, KT's taking all kinds of information, cameras from inside, cameras from, well, how you're recording me right now. In fact, even cameras that are mounted outside on Buggy One, and remixing that together to bring you shots of polar bears, images that hopefully get you engaged and wanting to learn more about polar bears. I mentioned this is a buggy after all, so we can't forget, here's the driver's seat, in case we need to get up and cruise around and look for some more bears. But we won't do that while we're talking with you this morning. In fact, before we get started and I introduce our panelists, I just wanted to give you a little bit of a preview of what Buggy One looks like from the outside. That barren landscape is just remarkable. Take a look at the rocks, the snow, and that's just out the windows right here. So as we come back into Buggy One, I'd like to take a moment to introduce our panelists, the guests on the show today who have such knowledge and so much great information to share with you and frankly to be able to answer your questions. So Stephanie, can you start and say hello and tell everyone a little bit about yourself?
Hi everybody, excited to be here. My name's Stephanie Penk and I'm a graduate student at the University of Toronto in Canada. And my research focuses on determining the energetics of polar bears. So what I mean by that is I'm trying to figure out how much energy polar bears get when they eat a meal and how much energy they need to survive life up here on the tundra, to run around up here, to get out onto the ice, and to reproduce and survive.
Thank you so much. And BJ, you're the man responsible for this engineering marvel called Buggy One, as far as making it able to bring the internet, bring the cameras, deliver all this content to the students in classrooms all around North America and beyond. So can you share a little bit about what it is you do with Polar Bears International and how you came to be doing this kind of work?
Sure. So I'm BJ Kirchhofer, and I'm the Director of Field Operations for Polar Bears International. And my job is really kind of split into two different parts. Part of the year I'm here in Churchill kind of helping talk about science with people like Steph and Kyle and broadcasting that out to students like yourselves. And then the other part of the year I get to work in the field with polar bears and biologists, trying to ask some of the questions about what's going on with polar bears.
Thank you so much. And so speaking of learning about polar bears, we want you to learn with us. Today our goal is to answer as many questions as we can. In fact, we have an entire follow-up to this virtual field trip that is dedicated only to Q&A. As we go throughout this show, please make sure that you do contact us, whether you're on social media. We love to see what your viewing party experience looks like. How are your students organized? Are you sitting around a screen? What is it like as you learn about polar bears? You can share with us using the hashtag Tundra Connections and hashtag CelebrateWithDE. And if you want to get our attention, of course, tag at Polar Bears and at Discovery Ed. You may also email questions to us. Questions@pbears.org is the email inbox. Again, that's questions@pbears.org. And then if you're watching this on the Tundra Connections viewing page, there's a little chat panel you can sign up for and interact. And we have moderators that are helping us, thanks to those folks that are helping answer all of the questions right now. So here's a little bit about the show. First off, we're going to try to stay warm. It's in Fahrenheit, -2, but it's working its way to -6. The wind chill temperature, which it's debatable, but it looked like about -22 in Fahrenheit, and we figured that was around, what was it, -33 Celsius?
33, 36, somewhere around
there. And the
there,
actual temperature was -22. Did I have that right? Celsius, something like
Something
that?
like that.
I think we're around minus.
Yeah.
It's a bit
Getting
chilly.
close to 20.
You'll see the buggy rocking because the winds are blowing. And we're going to take you out to learn all about polar bears. In fact, we're going to start with a video about a polar bear named Ursula. We're going to come back, answer as many questions as possible, and then learn more about animal adaptations. And finally, we'll recap the show with what you can do and solutions that we can work together to try to support polar bears and learn about this Arctic and subarctic ecosystem. So, As we get started, don't forget to submit those questions, but let's just take a moment and really learn about a special polar bear named Ursula.
Polar bears are a mighty creature with a fragile future. It's amazing that they can survive, and in fact thrive, in an environment as cold and harsh as the Arctic. My name is Elisa McCall. I'm a polar bear scientist. I've studied a lot of bears over the years, but there's one that sticks out in my mind. Her research number is X33410, but we know her more fondly as Ursula. We first met Ursula in September of 2015 along the coast of Hudson Bay. At the time, she was a beautiful 8-year-old mother accompanied by a healthy yearling cub. It would be nearly impossible to follow a single polar bear around for an entire year in the remote Arctic, but through decades of research, we have been able to piece together the puzzle of what Ursula and other polar bears experience throughout their life. In this region of the subarctic, sea ice forms in the fall, covers the bay through the winter and spring, and melts completely in the summer months. Given that polar bears need sea ice as a platform to travel on and hunt seals, the summer melt forces polar bears to fast on land with little to no food for multiple months. As it became colder and ice slowly started forming along the coast, Ursula and her cub headed north. A GPS collar allowed us to closely follow their movements. Ice formation in 2015 was particularly late, and it wasn't until the end of November that the ice was finally strong enough for Ursula to head out onto Hudson Bay with her growing cub. As I watched Ursula's track moving across the map, I thought about the challenges she was facing. Frigid temperatures, complete darkness, dodging aggressive males, sniffing out seals, all with the sea ice moving and drifting beneath her feet. In the spring, it was time for Ursula to wish her now 2.5-year-old cub good luck and send him off on his own. I hoped she would successfully mate again and perhaps be able to raise another generation of cubs. In June, Ursula traveled farther out onto Hudson Bay. She was no doubt hunting seals and trying to fatten up before the sea ice started to break apart. Each year, Ursula's world literally dissolves in the summer heat. Shortly after that, Ursula's collar went offline. This probably meant that she was swimming back to shore, because the collar doesn't have a signal when it's in the water. So I was relieved to see her collar pop back online east of the town of Churchill, Manitoba in early August. She continued her journey inland toward a denning area, and scientists spotted a fabulously fat Ursula in the final days of September. Shortly after that, her collar signal stopped moving, and I crossed my fingers that she might have entered a den. Around Christmas, she did indeed give birth to at least 2 cubs. In March, she and her cubs emerged from the den. I couldn't help but feel excited at the thought of those adorable little polar bears exploring the world for the very first time. Ursula had not had a proper meal for nearly 8 months. Now that her cubs were ready, they began their journey to the sea ice to hunt seals, and we can be sure they were hungry. Shortly before making it out on the ice, scientists once again spotted Ursula, confirming that she had 2 young cubs in tow. I was thrilled when I got the news. Protecting, feeding, and teaching young cubs how to survive on a moving platform of ice is no small feat, but these are critical lessons for a polar bear and vital to the survival of the species. In July, Ursula's collar went offline. The last known location was out on the sea ice in the middle of Hudson Bay. The normal challenges Ursula faces are great, but in a warming world, the challenges polar bears face are immense. In September of 2017, scientists found Ursula's collar on land. She made it back. Whether her cubs made it with her or not, we may never know. If they did, were they able to survive the long fall without food? And then another? More than that, I wonder if they realize their world is melting away. Ursula and her cubs have to wait on land an average of 1 day longer every year. They have to survive a month longer on land without food than their grandparents did. And Ursula's cubs face an even longer fast unless we bring a halt to rising carbon emissions. If the world continues to warm, Ursula's cubs will face challenges they won't be able to overcome. But it's not all hopeless, and there is good news. We can choose to act now to halt climate change and make a swift transition to renewable energy. Ursula was still able to give birth and raise multiple generations of cubs. Polar bears still thrive over much of their current range, and we have the knowledge and tools to halt climate change in time to keep it that way. We stopped acid rain, we saved the ozone, we can save polar bears. If we do, we will not only help Ursula, but all life on Earth, including ourselves.
Understanding just what Ursula went through and really thinking about that story, it opens up our eyes to the ecosystem that the bears live in, to how they survive, to what they eat, to even their adaptations, which we will get to in just a couple minutes here. And we wish we could show you a bear just outside this window, but it is so blowing. In fact, I learned a little bit of what this terminology for this weather is called. BJ was sharing with me earlier. Can you talk a little bit about the ground storm that's happening? Because as we look up into the sky, you can see the sun.
Yeah, it's kind of a neat phenomenon that happens here in the Arctic from time to time. It's not really snowing out, or it doesn't appear to be snowing, but there's so much wind it's picking up anything that can blow around out here on the landscape. And so we can't really see that far horizontally. Nope. But if you look straight up, you can still see the blue sky from time to time. So it's kind of a neat little ground blizzard that's happening here. I've seen it after dark where the northern lights were raging overhead, but you couldn't see the snowmobile hardly in front of you.
Wow. And of course, for the bears, what that means, they're either waiting and they're hiding in the willows, or they're out there on the ice. In fact, if you want to know a little bit about the ice formation, you can do that. Take a look at the Canadian Ice Service. If you research that, you'll find that on the internet, and it's pretty fascinating to see the growth day over day, and that's happening right now. What we were able to do, though, is we were able to shoot a really, we were able to capture a really adorable bear the other day on our way out here, and I thought we might pull it up because it's also a good example of how bears they just burrow themselves in the willows there, right? Isn't that pretty neat, just watching that bear? And this is what they're doing, and so they're hunkered down with this wind, they're curled up in a ball, they're even tough to spot. But when it breaks up and it's sunny like that, it's pretty neat. So while you're watching that, I did want to give just a couple shout outs. There's so many classrooms joining us. Hello, I know we have Scurry Schools, Bear Creek Elementary watching, Miss Heydrich, Miss Sahota, Miss Russo's class, thank you for joining us. I'm seeing pictures and photos all across the internet. This is great. Right from Twitter using Thunder Connections and Celebrate with DE, the 5th grade class from Ohio. Thank you so much for joining us. That's wonderful. We love to have you. We have Riddlebrook School that's joining us. Thank you so much. Miss Frank, so many questions coming in from Huntington Beach, California. They wrote all their questions on a whiteboard. I thought that was really clever. In fact, maybe something you can do to follow up the broadcast as you
really
want
cool.
to find out how you explore more, right? Miss Tisdale's class, thank you so much for joining us. Miss Gavapol's class, all these photos are amazing. In fact, Miss Bates students even dressed up like polar bears.
Oh,
Take a
that's
look
incredible.
at that.
That's
They're
awesome.
dressed up like polar bears.
Love
there.
it.
Isn't that pretty neat? So we hope
Yeah.
you'll take a look and interact, because that's exactly the power of these Tundra Connections. We view them as shared learning experiences, where you're learning with a whole bunch of other students. So let's go ahead and take a couple questions, because there's so many rolling in here. I thought we might start with one of our video questions that was submitted to us. And this question came from Ben in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania.
Hi, I'm Benjamin from Adwood Primary School. I was wondering, do polar bears see in color or not? Hi, I'm Benjamin from Adwood.
All right, so Ben wanted to know, do polar bears see in color?
Yeah, well, we actually have now discovered that bears have dichromatic color vision. So that means that they have two cones in their eyes, and that allows them to see two different wavelengths. So that's two different distinct colors. And that is one less cone than you have at home. So you have a red, a green, and a blue, and polar bears just have yellow and blue. So they are able to see color, but the other thing about polar bears is that they're not just using their eyes, right? We have here the polar bear skull, and you can see this big, big area, and that is his nose. And there's so much surface area in there, and it allows bears to smell kilometers or miles away. So even though they do have color vision and do have some ability to see in the night, they're really following their nose more so than their eyes.
It's pretty fascinating. Thank you again. Just a couple shout outs here. We have students of the Bulldogs in Missouri that are watching. Thank you so much. We've got first graders in Virginia Beach. Virginia Beach, hello. Thank you so much. Places that are connecting from far and wide. So let's just answer a couple more questions here. What about polar bears? Cromie Elementary in Michigan wants to know, do they ever travel in groups?
That's kind of a good question. I think that's probably one of the easiest ways to tell the difference between male and female polar bears. Probably if you see a group of bears, especially if it's one larger bear and a couple single or a couple smaller bears, it's probably a family group. And so it's probably a mom and cub or mom and two cubs. It does get a little bit confusing as those cubs get older. As they approach 2 years, if it's a male cub, it could be almost as big as mom. So it almost looks like a pack of bears hanging out. But otherwise, we don't think they spend a ton of time in groups traveling. Here in the coast of Hudson Bay, where they're waiting for the sea ice to freeze, they might gather up on the beach and kind of wait. But you know, there isn't like large packs of polar bears roaming the sea ice looking for seals to eat.
Yeah, circumstantial for sure.
Yeah.
As to why they're together. Okay. Well, speaking of traveling, we had another video question that I wanted to bring up. And this question came from Santa Rosa County in Florida. So thank you, students, for joining us and for watching. And it's from Olivia. Let's go ahead and listen to Olivia's question.
Hi, I'm Olivia, a second grade student from Santa Rosa County in Pace, Florida. My question is, how far can polar bears travel? Hi, I'm Olivia, a second...
That's a good
I
question.
hope you heard that one. It was how far can polar bears travel?
Yeah.
Steph?
So polar bears can actually travel large distances. Now, their whole job while they're out there on the ice is to find seals. So the length of their travel really depends on where the seals are, and if they're able to find them close, then they won't travel too far. But they can go upwards of 850 kilometers or 550 miles over the course of the year trying to track those seals down. So to give you some perspective, that's about the distance from New York City to Detroit, or longer than Florida. So if you started at the bottom of Florida, you would hit Georgia before polar bears were done their yearly walk. And now that depends, the amount of movement they do really depends on the season as well. So during the summertime, with these western Hudson Bay bears, they're not doing much moving at all. And their most travel time comes during the freeze-up period, which is happening right now. And they're out there on the ice getting ready to find the seals. And speaking of ice, we did have an interesting analogy. We also have to think about ice is moving constantly. So when polar bears are trying to get from point A to point B, they might be walking against that ice, so they're almost fighting a treadmill to try and get where they need to go.
That's pretty amazing to think about. I mean, it's kind of, you say, it's an uphill journey,
yes.
You know, figuratively, of course, but I mean, that's a lot of things against them, let's just say.
Definitely.
So, wow. Well, speaking of the ways that polar bears are adapted, let's take a moment and just learn about those adaptations and why they're uniquely suited to live in this environment.
Polar bears live across the Arctic in some of the coldest places on the planet. They walk across the Arctic sea ice looking for their main prey, seals. And they have some traits that help them do this and survive in this crazy cold environment. Polar bears have very thick fur that helps keep them warm. In fact, they have 2 layers of fur. They have a thick, fuzzy, downy layer right next to their skin, which would be like us wearing a woolly sweater. And then they have a layer of guard hairs, longer hairs over top. It's kind of like their raincoat. And these 2 layers of fur help keep them warm even when it's minus 40 degrees. Polar bear hair is clear and hollow. It just looks white to our eyes. And the hollowness helps trap warm air against their bodies. Polar bear skin is black. We don't really know why, but we think it might help them absorb heat. Polar bears have an amazing sense of smell. Their nose has so much surface area to pick up scents in the air. They can smell prey over a kilometer away when the wind is right. Polar bears have huge paws. They can be the size of dinner plates. The big paws help spread out the polar bear's weight on the sea ice so they can walk along really thin ice if they have to. Polar bear feet can also get smelly. When females are ready to mate, they send out signals through smelly footprints on the sea ice. And a male polar bear who picks up the scent will follow a female, sometimes for days on end. Polar bear paws are also kind of sticky. They have bumps or papillae on the bottom of their feet that help grip the ice as they're walking. Kind of like your winter tires. They also have fur on their feet to help keep them warm and really sharp claws that help give them traction on the ice so they don't slip. Polar bear claws are thick and sharp. Their claws help them pull out slippery seals from underneath the water up onto the sea ice. Polar bears also have very big heads with really sharp teeth that helps them hunt their prey seals. You can see they've got big canines at the front, and then they've got very sharp back molars that help them shear blubber and fat off of their prey. The diastema, or the gap between the front sharp canines and the back molars, is perfect for helping polar bears grab a seal out of the water and pull it out onto the sea ice. You can see that all of these adaptations make a polar bear perfectly suited to live in the Arctic. They need sea ice to travel, hunt, find mates, and sometimes to den. Please join us in taking action to help conserve polar bears and the sea ice they depend on.
There's so much information there and so many interesting facts that I learned. I love learning about the thick fur, about the 2 different types of fur that they have, how their nose can just smell from such long distance. My favorite fact there, if I had to be honest, is that the polar bears themselves, they can send smells out through their paws. I mean, I never knew that. That was just fascinating to me. And I would love to know, what's that fact that you just learned that's so fascinating to you? Go ahead and put that out there on Twitter. Use hashtag ThunderConnections and celebrate with DE. We'd love to see, what is it that captured your attention, classes? What is it that just went, ooh, wow, I didn't realize that. And we'll follow up. We can't wait to see what you post there. Yeah. So let's go ahead and get to more questions. There's so many rolling in here. We're watching these videos and also smiling at just the photos and the pictures and all the students watching. So let's ask a couple of them. We have lots of questions about the kind of the ecosystem and the sea ice as well. Can you just talk about that ice and how do the bears know specifically when it's safe to walk on? You know, anything about the ice that you can share, Steph?
Yeah. So We obviously have been talking a lot about how polar bears need sea ice to find their food source, seals. So they also need it to leave those smelly footprints on so that they can track down each other to mate. And they need it to move around. So very important for polar bears. But sometimes what we don't think about is how important the Arctic sea ice is for all the other creatures in that marine ecosystem. So when sea ice freezes, it pushes the salt out of the ice, and that leaves little channels in this ice that allows room for algae to grow. And this algae supports the whole ecosystem. So we have little invertebrate creatures that'll eat the algae, and then the fish will eat the invertebrates, and then those seals eat the fish, and that supports the seal population for our polar bears to eat. So really, really important sea ice, not just for polar bears, but for everything out here on the Arctic sea ice.
You just answered a whole bunch of questions. Central Elementary, they sent in a bunch of questions. They were wondering how many seals a polar bear eats a day.
Okay, yeah.
Boy, they would love one a day, I think.
They would, I think so. They're gluttons, that's for sure. Now, they don't really eat the same amount a day. They're not like us. It's not 3 meals a day every day. They have what's called a feast and famine lifestyles. So when they have access to those seals, they try and get as many as they can. And when they catch a seal, they sit down and they eat 100 pounds of blubber just in one sitting. So very different. But they have to make sure they put on enough fat stores so that when they no longer have access to those seals, they can survive just using their fat stores, and they don't eat anything for upwards of 8 months for some female polar bears that give birth.
Wow, incredible. And that answers Ms. Thomas's class. Thank you for submitting your question. In fact, thank you to Ms. Michelle's class from Winnipeg. Not too far away. We're so glad that you're with us, that you're learning today. Excellent, excellent. In fact, Ms. Reimer's class, wow, what a viewing party. So many students there in the library.
Oh,
they're
wow.
just packed in there.
That's
Super
great.
Thank you
cool.
for joining. That is really cool. So a couple more questions here. Specifically, there's a lot of questions about how you find out what the bears are doing, how you track them, how you understand them and perform research.
I think this might be a good one for BJ.
Yes, I think that's been a big challenge. Up until this point, a lot of what we know about polar bears comes from radio collars. So maybe you've seen photographs of other animals or polar bears wearing a collar. For polar bears, female polar bears can only wear collars. The males kind of have a really thick neck and a smaller head, and those collars can fall right off. So the females wear the collars, and so we know a lot about where females go because we can find their locations through the satellite and kind of how they move and use that landscape. But it hasn't been real fine-scaled information throughout the whole history of collaring. Recently, they've put almost like Fitbit for polar bears inside some of these collars. They call them accelerometers inside these collars, and we're able to now start taking that information and kind of correlating it back to behavior. So are they swimming? Are they running? Are they walking? That sort of thing. So we can kind of understand. But this is still relatively new as far as polar bear research is concerned.
Very new.
Back to the adaptations topic, we had a video question that was submitted, a middle school. In fact, this is Lily from Eastbrook Middle School in Georgia. So hi Lily, thank you for joining us and watching. Let's go ahead and listen to her question.
Hi, my name is Lily. I'm in 7th grade Eastbrook Middle School in Dalton, and my question is it possible for polar bears to adapt to the changing climate before they go extinct?
So the question there again is it possible for polar bears to adapt to a changing climate before they go extinct?
Right. Well,
You know, that's... Oh, go ahead. It looks like you were jumping on that one.
I'll do my little piece, and then we'll go over to BJ here too. But I think it's interesting if we look back in history. We know that there was a period where glaciers and extended a lot further south, and you can actually find evidence that polar bears were actually living further south when that ice was existing down there. But when those glaciers receded back north, the polar bears went with them. So if we take a lesson from history, it doesn't seem that the polar bears will be able to adapt if there is no ice for them to follow.
Yeah, and I think I would add that, you know, there's some debate, but around 800,000 years for polar bears to evolve from a grizzly bear. They're still so closely related. These two animals are still closely related. They can still interbreed and create viable offspring. So they're pretty close cousins, if you will, you know. But you can't take a polar bear and move it back on land and expect it to, you know, turn into a grizzly bear again in a matter of, you know, decades or 100 years or something like that. And you wouldn't have a polar bear anyways. You wouldn't have a marine mammal. You'd have a terrestrial bear again.
Right.
Also, polar bears are huge. We'll probably talk about that here. And the bears that live on land here in the Hudson Bay region, they're quite small. And it's because their food isn't quite as fatty or nutritious to grow such a huge animal. So it's not possible.
Well, let's take a look. I think the other thing that question does is it really hones in on that idea of becoming extinct, and will they, or are there things that we can do? So let's take a look and learn just a little bit more about fossil fuels and the impact that carbon dioxide and other fossil fuels are having on our environment.
Future generations of people and polar bears depend on the decisions and plans that we make today. A polar bear's life cycle is almost exclusively tied to the sea ice. Because polar bears rely on sea ice to hunt, to breed, and sometimes to den, sea ice loss from climate change is their biggest threat, and the reason the bears are listed as vulnerable on the IUCN's Red List of Threatened Species. What we learn about climate change impacts on polar bears in Hudson Bay can be applied across the Arctic to help conserve other populations. Climate change is already affecting some populations of polar bears. Since we get most of our energy from fossil fuels, we are producing huge amounts of carbon dioxide. You see, regular amounts of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere act like a blanket around the Earth, trapping heat and keeping our planet at a stable temperature. However, when we burn fossil fuels like coal, oil, and natural gas for energy, we pump rampant amounts of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. This buildup thickens the blanket, trapping too much heat, disrupting the climate, and melting Arctic sea ice. When Arctic waters are cold enough, the top layer freezes into a special type of ice called sea ice. Sea ice is to the ocean what soil is to a forest. It supports the entire Arctic food chain. Food from this marine ecosystem also sustains northern communities. The key to getting the climate back to functioning the way it should, and to preserving a future for polar bears across the Arctic, is to move away from using fossil fuels for energy altogether. The most important thing we can do is vote with the climate in mind to let our leaders know we support a swift transition to renewable energy sources. In the meantime, we can directly participate in and learn more about our local and regional renewable energy options. We can all make a difference outside our own households by influencing where our energy comes from. Because together, we can make sure that polar bears roam the Arctic sea ice for generations to come.
I love that idea, the idea right there at the end, the hope, right? There is absolutely still hope. We can absolutely work together here. But we're getting a lot of questions in, and specifically, again, our friends over in Vancouver, hello, thank you to Surrey Schools for joining us. They wanted to know, what can students today do to combat climate change and preserve polar bear habitats? BJ, you've done a lot of work here, and you've seen their habitat and seen the changes being out in the field so often. Can you respond to that one?
Sure. I think it's a pretty interesting conservation problem that we have with polar bears. It's not like the historic problem where an animal's habitat is disappearing so you can build a fence around it and keep people out and everybody's safe, the bears are safe or whatever. The sea ice is melting, and you can't put a fence around melting sea ice. You guys, in fact, at home, learning about polar bears right now and engaging in this webcast, you're taking the first step in helping polar bears. The next step is really talking to the people around you, talking to your parents, your families, about what you learned here, about ways that you can reduce your climate emissions in your own homes and in your lives. And that's really super important, and believe it or not, that will help polar bears.
Excellent. Hi to the students in Newburgh, New York, by the way. So many of you sharing your photos and joining in, really appreciate that. We're getting a lot of other questions about just what can you do, right? I think personally, this is the start. We hope that you'll continue to extend your learning journey. But we also got a question from Michael, and Michael is from Troy High School in Fullerton, California. So Michael, thank you for joining in. Thank you for listening. Let's go ahead and tune into his question.
How did you start studying polar bears?
So, Steph, perhaps we can start with you. How did you start studying polar bears, and was it a lifelong dream to study polar bears from when you were little?
Yeah, so I took a bit of a windy path, but I always knew that I loved wildlife. So when I graduated from high school, I pursued my degree, my undergraduate degree, in wildlife biology. So I didn't know exactly where I was going with that, but I knew I wanted to have the knowledge to get involved with the environment and wildlife. So I actually took my first job studying bats, and they might be way, way smaller than bears, but the bats that I studied actually kind of face a similar challenge. They go into caves and hibernate, or go into a small hibernation. It's called torpor. But they need to make sure that they have enough fat stores on them so that they can survive overwintering in those caves without eating. So although we're talking about grams of fat on bats, and on polar bears we're talking about kilograms, which is about 1,000 times as large, it's a similar problem of this energetics. So after I finished up doing some presence-absence surveys, endangered species surveys with bats, I found a position to go back to school, so graduate school. I'm pursuing my doctorate. And this research project was focused on energetics in polar bears. And so I was able to kind of apply what I'd learned with bats and with that previous degree to this new project. And it's been a really amazing experience, and definitely makes me feel pretty good to be able to turn my passion into my work.
Excellent. And of course, those of you that want to study science, we encourage you to do so. We also realize that not everyone will go and do that. And VJ, I think your story is an interesting path to say, hey, you never know where you'll end up if you follow your passion. So can you speak a little bit about your past?
Sure. So I always enjoyed being outside when I was young, and ended up going to school in Montana because it offered those opportunities. I studied photography and media arts there, and that brought me up to Churchill here to help put on this program and run the streaming cameras. Through that, I was able to meet the scientists going out in the field, and I was asked to join them on a couple different projects, and that's really how I got into polar bears, more from kind of a hands-on perspective and learning to communicate and share that about the bears.
Excellent, thank you. And thank you to all of you that are watching. Miss Sanders' second grade library class tuning in and joining us. Miss Keller's class, Parkview Elementary is with us. Thank you. Mrs. White's second and third grade class participating. Thank you so much. There's just so many photos, so many questions here. We can't get to them all. We absolutely wish that we could. It's just not possible. But the good news there is that we have a follow-up event. Right after this, in about 45 minutes or so, we have an event, just Q&A. No, videos or anything. It's just you guys ask us questions, and we will answer as many as we can. So we'll hope that you'll use this event today, use that event in a little bit, to continue to learn about polar bears. I would finish by saying, it's my hope that the classes, the students that are tuning in, just use this as that first step. You're just getting started. What else can you do? Think about that. Maybe you can't vote, but your parents can vote. But what you can do is you can vote with your actions, right? The little things that you do, the choices you make every day, even in your home communities, do have a greater impact. So we hope that you'll continue to engage in this such important topic, and you'll continue to take those steps. If you want to continue to learn more, of course, Polar Bears International is chock full with resources. We hope that you'll continue to explore there. Those of you joining us from Discovery Education, we have a whole lot of resources. Can't wait to see what you come up with. Lots of your teachers post your 6-word stories and those follow-up strategies that you use for engaging and using digital content. We hope that you'll continue to share what it is you're learning about. But we can't thank you enough for just wanting to be here, wanting to learn with us. We're going to go warm up a little bit. I think this wind is blowing us around a little bit. But it's just been a phenomenal webcast, and thank you, thank you, thank you. Have a great rest of your day. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Welcome to our Polar Bear live chat. This is a nice informal opportunity to answer as many questions from you guys as we can. So if you're new to the broadcast, if this is the first time you're joining Tundra Connections, welcome. Thank you for tuning in. And of course, if you were coming back to us, you followed and watched maybe one of our virtual field trips or one of the Tundra Connections events that happened prior to this week, we're so happy that you continue to join us. And my name, by the way, is Kyle Schutt. I'm the partner on today's program with Discovery Education. We're so thankful to Polar Bears International and all of the sponsors that make this possible for us to be up here on this roving Tundra buggy. Buggy 1, it's called, just off the shores of the Hudson Bay. It is blistery cold and quite windy out there, but it's making for a gorgeous, gorgeous scene as you're taking a look at the Polar Bear cam right now. That was just off the front of the buggy, and hopefully we'll take a look out there from time to time. It's possible a bear may roam by, but that ice is forming quickly at these temperatures, so it's definitely packing and working its way further out. So before we just jump in and get started, I thought I'd let our panelists introduce themselves. You may know BJ very well, or maybe you don't, but BJ, why don't you start and then we'll come back to Steph.
Sure, I'm BJ Kirchhofer, and I'm the Director of Field Operations for Polar Bears International. I get to spend a lot of time in places where there are polar bears, which has been super fun, both here talking about polar bears and then in other places in the Arctic researching polar bears to find out what they do so we can learn a little bit more about how we can take care of them.
Awesome. Hi, I'm Stephanie Penk, and I am lucky enough to be up here to talk to you guys, but normally I am down in Toronto at the University of Toronto in Canada, and that's where I am doing my research project on polar bear energetics. So I look to try and determine how much energy polar bears are getting when they eat a meal and how much energy they're using when they're performing all the activities they need to do to stay alive and reproduce.
And what that means is that we have very informed people that can hopefully answer most of your questions, but it's possible, like we did yesterday, maybe we'll have to Google, see if they can be the scientist to finding the answer.
Can we do that? Is that cheating for us? Can we Google?
I think it's okay, but let's see what we know first and what we can answer.
Sounds good.
Let's jump right in. We have some first graders. Hello, Newtown Elementary School. Miss Cunningham, it appears, is joining and bringing her students along. Thanks for coming along. And they would like to know two things. One, how many seals does a polar bear eat in an average season?
That's a good question.
Yeah, so if we're talking about the average on ice season, an adult polar bear wants to get about 43 seals in order to make sure that they have enough fat stored up on them to survive that onshore season when they're not able to hunt seals and they're relying on that fat stores.
And to give some perspective, you said the on-ice season. Can you just talk a little bit about what is the on-ice season as opposed to the off-ice season, and how long are those?
Yeah, so the on-ice season is what we're just about to start now. So when that Hudson Bay starts to freeze over again and our western Hudson Bay polar bear population is able to get back onto the ice and go find those seals. And so that ice every year freezes up and then breaks up when the temperatures start to increase again. And those freeze-ups and break-up timing of the ice determines just how long that onshore period is and that on-ice period is. And the freeze-up and break-up is determined directly by critical temperature levels, so really impacted by any changes to the Arctic temperature.
Random fact for you, polar bears need about 56 Snickers bars worth of calories every day in order to survive. So can you imagine eating 56 Snickers bars every day?
Wow.
Pretty sick.
You'd be pretty sick.
Not a healthy way to go through life for a human, but
no.
That's a lot of calories that they need.
It's a lot of calories.
Don't try that at home.
No.
Yeah, how about it? Well, the second question from Newtown Elementary School was, how do you put the trackers on bears like Ursula? Now, what I really love about that question is that you guys either watched earlier or perhaps you created your own virtual viewing party with the content that we shared ahead of time to learn about Ursula. If you have not done that, please go and take a look at these fascinating stories that the team at PBI has put together to learn about. So what do you think? Steph, it seems like a good one for you, but BJ, I know you have a lot of experience with trackers as well.
Yeah, I think this might be best for BJ.
Okay.
He's been pretty involved with trackers.
A little bit, yeah. So I was lucky enough to be able to go on a polar bear collaring expedition earlier this year. It's a pretty rare event, even for polar bear researchers. I think you'll find out through our chat here, there's a lot of different ways to get into polar bear research. You could be looking at the numbers side. You could be looking at, like Steph is looking at how they move. But to go on and actually go put collars on is pretty special. Not very many people get to do that.
No.
So I got to go help put one tracker on a polar bear earlier this year. It was about 10 miles north of where we are right now. It happened in the month of May. And we actually go find the polar bears with a helicopter. And once we find them, we can sedate the polar bear with a dart. And once it's safely asleep, the scientists get on the ground and can take a range of measurements from how long it is, how big around the body is, how big its skull is. And then at the same time, we can put a collar or an ear tag transmitter on the polar bear so we can figure out where it spends its time, where it goes for the next year to 2 years.
Now, when we think about collars, they're pretty big devices. In fact, if we take a look at the skull here that's in front of us, you can see just how massive that is. One of our questions as we were preparing for the event, we happened to set the fur down, right? Nice polar bear fur, you can see it. But somebody happened to just kind of set it right down there on the skull, and it got our mind wondering, should the hairstyle be that way, or does that look better? What do you guys think? I don't know. Do you guys have a preference?
I think the students should chat it in.
Yeah.
Let us know.
Yeah.
Are we forward spike or are we back slick back?
Yeah, forward spike or reverse spike. That's what we want to know from you today.
Yeah.
And perhaps, now that we give him a hairdo, what's his name? It seems like he's coming to life a little bit. Do you have a name for our little friend here? We'll monitor Twitter and see what you come up with.
He needs one.
All right. So more questions coming in, and thank you so much. We have first graders joining with us. We have kindergartners joining with us. Very, very cool. South Lebanon, Ohio submitted a question. They said, we're very curious about other food types for polar bears. So are there other food types for polar bears?
Well, the main thing that polar bears are looking for is fat. So they're the only fully carnivorous bear species, but we often refer to them as lipivores. And what that means is lipid means fat. And so they're looking for anything with significant sources of fat. So if they're lucky enough to come across a whale carcass, they'll feast on that. Some populations, some subpopulations can try to get their claws on walrus, but it's pretty dangerous to try and take on a walrus. If you guys want to Google something neat, check out how big a walrus is in comparison to a polar bear. They can be pretty terrifying
huge
animals. Yeah. But yeah, they're looking for anything that has a fat source on it. And I think sometimes they've been seen actually trying to pull belugas out of the water as well.
Yeah,
sometimes.
not too far north of here. That's
Yeah.
been spotted. But I think that's a pretty rare occurrence. It's not happening
Definitely.
everywhere.
No. Normally it's just an opportunistic meal. If a whale comes ashore, they're pretty much very specifically adapted to pull seals. If we can maybe take his hairdo off for a second here. But yeah, they have a really large skull, but it's still only large enough for a little seal head to fit in here. And that's what they're really adapted to grab and yank out of the water. Everything else is not quite as successful when they try to hunt other animals. Yeah.
I really like the food web graph.
Yeah.
I can't wait to see the names coming in.
I'm excited.
The food web graph there that our friend KT put up that you could just see, and it's coming up again here, just really talks to the entire marine food web and the ecosystem. Anything else that you wanted to add to that? I know you were talking specifically about the bears and what they eat, but they are dependent, even if they're not eating it directly, dependent on even things like those microorganisms.
Yeah.
Yeah, the whole ecosystem is really kind of underneath the ice. Without the ice, it would be easy to say, oh, polar bears could maybe live on something else. Well, it's more than just the ice. It's everything that lives underneath the ice that makes the entire system work, as that graphic shows. So without the ice, you don't have the little squiggly diddlies, if you will, underneath. You don't have the fish. and you don't have the seals, and therefore you won't have polar bears.
Yeah. They may be at the top of the food chain, but you still need that rest of the food chain to be able to survive.
Absolutely. Okay, Redstone Elementary, thank you for joining. Time for your question. Miss Thomas looks like she submitted a question. Have you all seen polar bears take the same routes on the frozen ice year after year? That's an interesting one. Do they take the same routes? Is there any data on that?
Well, the thing is that ice is the Arctic sea ice, it never really freezes the same way twice. There may be particular patterns that it does follow, but a bear really doesn't see the same path twice. So there's certain routes that they have that they're committed to, but it's mostly on land. Once they're forced ashore, they kind of trek up the same pathways to get to this shore or to get to their denning sites. But yeah, it's a changing surface out there every year.
In places where they do come ashore, one of our colleagues was just in Wrangel Island, another place to Google. It's an island north of Russia, near Alaska, and there's pathways there from the beach on up to places where they could maybe look out, and they suspect that these pathways were maybe worn in by polar bears. There's not a whole lot else out there that would do that, so it's probably true.
Yeah.
Wow. Interesting questions coming in, and by the way, that makes me think about tracking bears. If you haven't taken a look at Polar Bears International's website, really love the bear tracker. If you haven't taken advantage of that, where you can follow those different bears and see where they're going, and it's pretty fascinating. I like to adjust the timeline slider to see year over year or the previous years where the ice is formed and how the routes take there. So again, putting it back to you guys, because we want you to continue to learn. I think to truly be an ambassador of the Arctic and to take a stance, you need to take a little bit of initiative and learn on your own. We'll give you as many answers as we can, but we want you guys to continue to learn. So thank you. More questions coming in. Darvion, hope I'm saying that name properly, asks if polar bears get sick if they eat a sick seal. I guess would polar bears get sick if they eat a sick seal?
Ooh, that's a really good question.
I mean, there's different types of sickness, so I'm not sure if they're really suffering from the common cold, but we do know that they can get parasites when they eat infected seals. So they certainly do have that to contend with. And we don't really see too many sick polar bears, though. And I mean, it could just be that they're not making it back to where we catch them.
We do have another person on the buggy here who has looked at pollutants in polar bears. I don't know if Teo would want to jump in here. Does Teo want to jump in and talk about...
Yeah.
Sure.
I think it's worthwhile.
Yeah.
Come over here real quick, Teo. This will be fun. Here you go. You can just take this right here. Oh, it's on the other side. Yeah, here you go.
There you go.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Sit down. There you go.
All right. Hi. So, repeat the question.
If a polar bear eats a seal, and it was a sick seal, would the polar bear get sick as well?
Right, okay. So, the issue here is that there is a lot of pollution in the high Arctic. It comes from further down south, but it's transported north. And it's incorporated into the food chain.
How is it transported, real quick?
With the wind and with the ocean currents. And the thing is that a lot of these different contaminants, these different chemicals, they are what we call lipophilic. So they love being in the fatty tissue of any kind of organism, really. And as I'm sure you talked about, polar bears love to eat seals, but not just seals, but seal fat. So this is where you get a lot of these different contaminants, these chemicals. And so when the polar bear is eating all that yummy, yummy polar bear fat, it's also getting a lot of contaminants. And they can cause all sorts of trouble inside the polar bear. So a lot of organ damage. Some of these chemicals even make it into the brain of the bear.
Wow.
Yeah, they can have an effect on reproduction.
Wow.
Yeah. So it's not really the seal itself making the polar bear sick, but it's what humans produce that is then incorporated into the food web, ending up in the seal, and then ending up in the bear.
Yeah.
Fascinating. Thank you for being willing to jump in.
No problem.
We have experts.
Thank
so
you.
Pop out of any corner. You never know when
The
jump
bug is
in
not
there.
that big, but we have people waiting in the wings.
That was great. Lots of comments coming in, some questions. So far, by the way, the hair, they all think it should face forward.
Yeah.
Just in case, you can't see. We'll face it back just for a minute so we can come up with our final decision by the end of the Q&A here, but most people thinking it should face forward. Mrs. Morin's joining us from Corner Lake Middle School and all of her students. Thank you for coming to us today and bringing these questions. Interesting question here. It might be a trick question, but I'm going to go to you here, Steph. How long do polar bears sleep during hibernation?
That is a bit of a trick question. So polar bears don't actually hibernate. There's a distinction about what hibernation is versus sleeping. And what polar bears do is they just sleep. So they save a lot of energy by hunkering down and napping. And they can sleep upwards of 20 hours a day when they're, trying to conserve energy in the summertime. But yeah, no hibernation. Lots of bear naps, though.
And we saw that earlier. There were some questions about the polar bears being in caves, and I think they're referencing the imagery of the mom and the cubs coming out of the den. Can you speak a little bit to what a den is and why it could possibly be confused for a cave? But they don't hibernate. They don't typically find caves in this area. But can you talk to that a little bit?
Yeah, well, actually, I believe BJ was involved in a denning study. Were you not?
Yeah, we've worked on dens both in Alaska and in Norway. And it's true that some bears do go into snow caves, or in this place here in Churchill, they'll go into peat dens. But it's only the females, and it's only to give birth. So if you're a little male polar bear cub, the only time you'll ever really be in a snow den is when you're being nursed up to kind of healthy cub size, and when you emerge with your mother. So they're not really sleeping in there either. This is a time where mom is resting and nursing these cubs up from their birth weight up to something large enough where they can survive in the cold Arctic conditions. But yeah, that's probably where those images are coming from, is mom and cub coming out of the den.
Yeah, thank you. More questions here, and I like this one a lot because we had a glimpse of this just the other day. So this looks like Tim. Thank you for submitting the question. Tim wanted to know how tall a polar bear is when it's standing on its hind legs. And we had a glimpse of that as it was kind of up on the side of the tundra buggy the other day. BJ?
It would almost be as tall as maybe Steph and I stacked on top of each other. Not quite, but pretty darn close. They are. I mean, how many fifth graders do you think that would be?
I would think at least 3. It depends on the average size, perhaps what the fifth grader's diet is.
Yeah, right, of course, yeah. But they could be maybe up to 10 feet tall from tip of their feet up to the tip of their nose if they're really stretched out. So they are a huge animal. On all fours, as they're walking around, the way we mostly see them, a large bear could be up to 5 feet at the shoulder. So that's pretty tall.
And that's why we're in these big tundra buggies, these monster truck-sized tires. If you saw any of the imagery of the buggies themselves, they're taller than most fifth graders, just the wheels alone, right? So that we can be safe. And part of the reason we want to be safe is because, frankly, these bears haven't eaten in months, and that's why they are here. They're waiting to eat. And that goes to Miss Amanda's question from Grand Falls Royalty. Thank you for joining us, 7th and 8th grade students. They wanted to know, what is the bite force of a polar bear?
Ooh, that is a
Anybody
good
know
question.
that off the top of your head? I thought this might be a Google it, see who can figure it out first.
It might be a Google
Do you know?
I don't know the bite force, no. I mean, they got to have quite a bit of force because they're grabbing onto those seals, which, I mean, those seals can be upwards of 100 pounds, right? And they're yanking them up.
I do recall we were surprised that it wasn't as high as we thought it would be.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh.
So we'll get that look. We'll look that up for you here quick.
Yeah, or if
it's a very
any
good
of you
question.
can find it and respond back and let us know, beat us to it.
There There we go. Lots of other questions coming in. Are polar bears harmful to people? Thank you for joining us, Parkview Elementary. We saw you on a little bit earlier. In fact, we had a question. Which Parkview Elementary, right?
I went to a Parkview Elementary back in Minnesota, so hello if this is Parkview Elementary.
That'd be pretty.
Minnesota. That would be pretty neat.
Pretty neat.
Yeah.
Maybe it is. Let us know where you're from, Parkview. But lots of questions. In fact, even the kindergarten class, I'm not quite sure, Miss Aldridge, what school district that is in your Twitter handle. However, thank you for all those questions. Where do they live? I think we've learned a lot about that, about how we're tracking them in this Arctic region. We can perhaps stipulate that they do not live in Antarctica, right? Polar bears are not in the South Pole. Polar bears are only in the North Pole. So I always like to bring that up. I like this question a lot. Why do polar bears slide on ice? Because, of course, most things slide on ice. Everything slides on ice, but not all the time. They're pretty good at not sliding on ice. Can you answer that a little bit?
Yeah, so their feet have these little bumps. They're feet pads, and I believe they're papillae, if I'm saying that correctly. And all that means is it's little tiny bumps, and so that's kind of like the tread on your shoes. So that helps them to really stick and grip to the ice while they're trying to get across it. And their feet are just massive. They're very wide. Some are larger than dinner plates, or the big males can even be as big as platters. So again, lots of surface area for those little bumps to grip on, and also helps act like a snowshoe, so it distributes their weight even better. So despite being so large, they're able to walk across pretty thin ice.
More questions coming in. I know BJ's doing some searching. We'll come back in a minute and see if you guys answered it first or if he does. This is pretty neat. We have a group of homeschooling students from Southampton, New York, Van in India, and Weston Jude, and they want to know how long can polar bears stay in the water?
Oh.
That's a really good question.
Yeah. So the longest swim we've tracked, and that was thanks to those radio callers, was about 9 days. And that female swam that whole time. Now, that's not a good thing, though, for bears. Even though they are good swimmers and they can do long-distance swims, that bear came out incredibly skinny. She lost a lot of her fat stores doing that, and she also lost her cub. So for younger bears or malnourished skinny bears, they can lose a lot of energy trying to stay warm in the water, because it's a lot harder for them to stay warm. And so they're good swimmers, but they don't want to be in the water.
Absolutely. More comments, more questions. Real quick, BJ, that was Parkview Elementary in Baton Rouge, so I don't think it's the same.
Well, hello to them, too.
But hello. We also have a class, Miss Neugen, if I'm saying that properly, Mrs. Neugen, in Allen, Texas. So thank you for joining us all the way from Texas. They wanted to know, how long do polar bears live? I think we talked about that briefly in the earlier episode or earlier virtual field trip, but in a zoo, that bear, what was the bear's name?
It was Debbie. Bear's name was Debbie, and it was in Winnipeg. Winnipeg, Manitoba.
Up to 40 years?
42 years.
42 years old.
So she was pretty old.
Good health care
like I said,
plan.
Yeah, good health care plan. She had a good meal plan.
Yeah.
She was well taken care of.
Yeah.
Bears in the wild.
Average, right?
Yeah, bears in the wild, they don't live quite that long. Into their 20s, especially males, they live a pretty rough life.
They do.
They have to fight pretty hard in order to have access to a female during breeding season. And this will shorten their lifespan. So the males don't live quite as long as the females, but the mid-20s would be about average.
Okay. Coming back around to the swimming question, we had 5th graders in Audubon. I would guess Audubon Elementary, but that's Redmond, Washington. So thank you. Jumping to the other part of the states. So I love how we're kind of bouncing around from state to state. Their question was, can polar bears see underwater? And do they catch seals while swimming in the water?
Okay, well, one of those is pretty easy to answer. Seal wins every time. If they're both in the water, fully in the water, seals are much more adapted for swimming than polar bears are. So polar bears might be good swimmers, but seals are amazing swimmers. So they're not going to have luck there. I don't see why they couldn't see underwater. They have not too much different. Oh wow, here we go. Who wore it best? Sorry, I got distracted there. Polar bears have pretty similar eyesight, not too different from you. A few differences in what colors they see. But you can see underwater, but you can't see the same or quite as well as you can on land. So I'd imagine it's something similar to that.
Now, if you're wondering why she was distracted, I'm not quite sure.
Yeah.
I just thought I'd try a new
Who knows?
hairdo. I'm a little thin up top, if you can tell, and it's a little cold out here, so I thought maybe the polar bear fur would keep me warm, and it is, guys. It's
Is
nice
it helping
and warm.
out?
It's helping. Kind of insulates the top.
Yeah.
Should it be front for me, or a little reverse? How's that?
That's
backwards?
cool. I think backwards is.
Backwards is better for me?
Yeah.
Maybe
It looks
let
very
us know,
streamlined.
We're still looking for your answers, guys, on our polar bear. Does he have a name? Should it be front? Should it be backwards? You let us know. Hopefully I'm making you laugh a little bit, because learning should be fun. Let's bounce around again. Here we have some questions from students in Orlando, Florida. So thank you to all of those students that are joining us. What are the predators of polar bears? I thought that was a fascinating question from Sabrina and Josh. Hi, guys.
So humans would be the only natural predator of polar bears. They're the top of the food chain, and there's no other animals out here that eat polar bears. Now, a male bear may go after a cub from time to time, or potentially females. It doesn't happen often, but it's possible.
And one other thing to note is, although grizzly bears aren't hunting polar bears, there have been some observations of grizzly bears chasing polar bears away from a food source, and it's kind of surprising because polar bears are typically larger than grizzlies, but those grizzly bears come in all charged up and angry, and the polar bears seem to just back off and let them have their way. So.
No kidding.
Yeah.
Well, I've been delaying here for a while, and BJ, I'm not going to give you the opportunity to answer. You might have looked up the question, but I'm on the side of the students, and
They found it.
We have a class here that's already answered, so we have
Perfect.
to go to
What did we find out?
Grand Falls Royalty. You guys win, because I saw it before he could say it, and it says, "We beat you." I like their pride, by the way.
Yeah.
We beat you.
own it.
It's 1,200 pounds per square inch. Is that what you found?
That's about what I found.
Wow.
That's pretty strong,
That is pretty strong.
man.
Bonus points, 2,000 bonus points.
Congratulations.
We're not sure where you can cash them in, but
But
congratulations, you earned them. We like to have a good time up here on the Tundra. Okay, a couple more questions that we're getting to here. I really like that we have some students in Maryland, in fact, in Baltimore, 4th graders. Hello. I was born in Baltimore. Heading back that way tomorrow, flying into BWI. So not too far away from you, I'm sure. They'd like to know, why do polar bears fight, or are they playing? And I think they were referring to the clip that we just shared a minute ago, the two bears sparring. Can we speak to that?
Yeah, sure. So it can be. So there are some times when polar bears actually are fighting. Like BJ mentioned, those male bears have a pretty rough lifestyle. They need to fight in order to mate with females. They have to defend the female from other potential suitors. But that's not to say that polar bears don't play. So when there's not a competition, when it's not mating season, you'll often see full-grown males or maybe subadult males just practicing sparring, and they're not trying to hurt each other. And also there's some great video clips of moms play fighting with their cubs, and so they do interact quite a bit, and with no fighting intentions. Yeah.
More questions here. What's the lifespan? We talked about that again a little bit. Average age, usually in the 20s, I think 22, something like that. It's fair? Yeah. Isn't that what you just said? I'm trying to remember.
Yeah, maybe not like the average lifespan per se, but if a bear reaches adulthood, and they can live easily into the early 20s.
Okay, yeah. Easily. Thank you. That's why I love having scientists that can specifically correct my words. That's good to know. Here's a great question. I love this one. What is the most babies a polar bear has ever had that's, of course, been recorded? We don't know, but that we've observed or recorded.
Ooh, that is a good one.
So 3 has been observed and recorded quite a bit. Not anymore. That takes a real fat pregnant bear to produce 3 cubs. And there was this one instance where mom was caught on camera with 4 cubs, but I believe, if I have the story straight, she actually adopted one of those cubs, so she had 3 of her own, and there was an orphan cub, and this mom kind of let him tag along, which was pretty incredible. So, yeah.
It's a lot of mouths to feed.
I know. I'm not too sure. I'd like to follow up. It'd be cool to see how she did, but it's a lot of responsibility for a mama bear out there.
I think all of the talk about the fur that was keeping my skull warm has piqued the interest. So let's shift to the actual fur of the polar bear. Is it clear? Can you describe it? What's going on?
So we've got a piece of fur here if you want to have a look. And this is part of what keeps a polar bear warm. And we can see here we've got some, it's kind of hard to see actually on the camera, but there's this soft downy layer underneath and then these longer guard hairs. And together that will help keep a polar bear nice and warm. The hairs are more or less clear, and it's the lack of color there that make them kind of look white, but they also will take on some of the colors in the environment. When we see them out here, especially against the pure white snow, they look almost a yellowish color oftentimes, and maybe you'll see that in the videos that KT's rolling.
Excellent. Well, we have only time for maybe one last question, and it's going to be a question to each of you, our panelists, and that is, what's the most important thing that you would tell the students that are so interested, they're having fun, they're learning with us and engaging, and we love that, but what's something that they can do that you think is important so that they can see not only the connection of this ecosystem to their homes, but then help polar bears and help the sea ice?
Go take the lead on this one.
Sure. So, you know, part of, if you tuned in earlier, my answer is going to be the same, because I think it's a pretty important answer. And that would be, you're taking the first steps right now. Being engaged and learning about polar bears, learning about climate change and what's happening to our planet is really the first step. And then talking to the people around you is the next step. So people do listen. Talk to your parents, talk to your family, and engage in conversation about these things that you're studying and you're learning. And you'll be surprised the changes that you can make.
Definitely. I mean, I think, just as BJ said, that's the first step, to engage, to learn, to question things. And that will help you to continue to talk about your knowledge and what you're learning. And just remember that the world will be yours, and you have a right to voice what you think should be happening. And your parents and your grandparents and your family care about you, so you let them know what you think we should be doing to preserve the things that you care about in today's world. Yeah. And,
excellent. Excellent. And I would follow that up as well. I think I try to live by actions speak louder than words, and often what I find so invigorating is that we use a lot of words. We use a lot of language to describe what's happening up here throughout these programs, and the students there and the teachers, they share what they're learning, how they're learning. And so consider, as you're sharing, as you're reflecting, as you're writing down things that you learned throughout today's events, consider what kind of language are you using? Are you telling others what to do, or are you saying, I will do that? Because I think sometimes just that subtle shift of you should to I am can go a really long way, to I am doing this, and you're setting the example. And I think we need more independent leaders that are willing to say, stand up and take charge. So continue to be leaders, as we know you are, because you're joining us today. So that's a wrap. We're so excited that you joined us. Thank you, thank you, thank you from Buggy One. As I mentioned earlier, it's time to stand up, thaw out the feet, warm up, and drive the buggy a little bit. But we hope you have an excellent rest of your school day. Thank you for joining in the Tundra Connections. Thank you to all the sponsors that make this possible. Have an awesome day, everybody. See you later.
Bye.
Bye.